And what had happened in the last 7 days was that they were on a high with Palm Sunday. Jesus came from Bethany to Jerusalem across the Mount of Olives and came down into Jerusalem, and they were welcoming him with palm branches, and the whole city was in a celebratory mood. But within the space of 5 days, this celebratory mood would turn into something disastrous, and the bottom would fall out, and they would free fall. Verse 17, Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. They were disappointed. They were downcast. Jesus' public ministry was for 3.5 years, 3 to 3.5 years. And during this time, he had accumulated a few disciples. And they had left their homes, their families, their professions, everything that they had, and they followed Jesus. And now, after spending time with Jesus for 3 years, after giving up their lives for 3 years, everything turned to nothing. All the promise, all the miracles, all the teaching, all the authority that they saw, it had turned to nothing. This happens to many sports teams. So if you've followed American football, you will see that even in Washington football team or different football teams where they buy a quarterback, and they build the team around the quarterback, right? They get wide receivers, and they get running backs, and they get all kinds of players around the quarterback. They try him out for a year, they try him out for 2 years, then it doesn't work, and the whole thing collapses. Then they got to get rid of this guy that they bought for so much, and now they have to start from scratch. And so the disciples are here, they had put all their hopes in this basket, and now it had all collapsed, and they were disappointed. Verse 21 says, "But we had hoped that he was the one." And the word "had hoped" is an imperfect active indicative, which means that they had hoped in the past and they are no longer hoping. There's no more hope left. And that's where they are. That's where Jesus finds them on the road to Emmaus. They were downcast and disappointed. Let me ask an obvious question. Why? Why were they downcast and disappointed? Let me read a couple verses. In verse 19, what things he asked? About Jesus of Nazareth they replied, "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people." And verse 21, "But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Among other things, the disciples thought that Jesus was going to lead a Jewish revolution. And that was the mindset of the disciples at that time. That was the mindset of the Jews at that time. And it's not their fault, because if you consider their history, way back in the book of Exodus, they were under the captivity of Egypt for 400 plus years. Then they wandered in the desert for 40 years, came to the promised land where they were there for about 700 years. Then they sinned, went to exile under Assyrian rule. 125 years later, they went into exile under Babylonian rule, the Babylonian Empire. They were under that empire for 70 years. Then came the Medo-Persian Empire. And for 100 years under the Medo-Persian Empire, they had some freedom to come back to Jerusalem and build the city wall and the temple. But then after that was the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, about 300 years before Christ. And then the Greek Empire gave way to the Roman Empire. So in BC 27, when Octavius Caesar became emperor, the Roman Empire officially started. So when Jesus was born and the time of the Gospels, it is a Roman Empire, and these Jews have been under oppressive rule for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so when Jesus came along, the guy with these miracles, the authority, the teaching, who stood up to even Jewish authorities, they thought that he was going to fight against the Romans and establish a Jewish kingdom. So much so that even after all this discussion that Jesus had with these disciples now, just before he ascended, in Acts chapter 1, verse 6, it reads, "Then they gathered around him and asked him, 'Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel?'" After all this, they are still asking, "Are you now going to lead a Jewish revolution?" They had a shadow view of Jesus. Jesus was not just the King of the Jews. He was much more than that. He had come not just to lead a revival of the Jewish nation. He had come for much more than that. But they had a shadow view of Jesus. So their disappointment was from a faulty expectation. From a faulty expectation. Sometimes we get disappointed with many things. It's even possible to get disappointed with God. Disappointed in the Christian faith because we have a faulty expectation. Let me give you some examples. The Lord is our healer. Right? I mean, there's a verse that says that. There are examples of God healing people. There's examples of Jesus healing people. There are commands to say to pray for healing. But if that's the only view we have, we will quickly come to realize that God does not heal every sickness. Not because he cannot, because it needs to be his will to heal. In addition, with the fact that God is a healer, we also have to consider that God is sovereign. So if we don't consider the sovereignty of God and the will of God, we will be disappointed in certain aspects of our Bible reading, certain aspects of the Christian faith, certain aspects of God. God, you said you would do this. Or God is going to supply all my needs. Right? Well, that again is under the sovereignty of God. Is he supplying every need of the believers who are being persecuted in North Korea? I've got a friend who is helping about 1,800 refugees from Afghanistan across the border to a country that I won't name. And of these families that he has been rescuing in the last several months, about 120 of them could not get across. All of them are Christians, believers, Afghani believers who are now trying to escape the country because of the Taliban. 9 of them he knows were executed because of their faith. And he knows several young daughters who are being sold, or who are not sold, who are taken as wives. Does God answer every prayer? Does God answer every need? Does God answer every want? Does God answer every healing? No. It comes under the banner of the sovereignty of God. So if we have a pinhole view of the Bible or of God, we are going to be disappointed. We have to see the big picture. So these disciples had a faulty expectation. So Jesus was about to correct their faulty expectation.